Let's talk about creating really old school dungeons. Welcome to my channel. I focus on tabletop role-playing games, video games, and science fiction. This is a very old school dungeon. I thought I would show you the one that I've drawn up. Now, I did not start using 5 squares per inch hex paper. I started drawing dungeons when I was in Germany, and this was millimeter paper. This is much larger. I think this is A3 or A2. I'd have to look at the sheet and find the actual size. And it's hard to find. I did find some of this online, and it's moderately expensive, but the advantage that it has is it puts, I use 1 millimeter is 1 foot. Now that actually works out, if you know, millimeter to 24.5 millimeters equals 1 inch. So you get 24.5 feet to the inch on this, which is basically the same scale as your 5-foot square, where you have 5 squares to the inch. It's a little bit less, very minute less. It's 24.5 feet versus 25 feet. So your scale is almost the same, but you have the advantage that it's broken down into 1 foot wide squares. So when you draw a wall, you can draw a 1 foot thick wall, which in my view, when you're drawing older type dungeons, let's assume that you're doing European style where you have really thick walls anyway. Of course, underground you really should have walls that are thicker than that to if they're load bearing, but let's assume these aren't load bearing. So I wanted to create a single dungeon, multi-layer dungeon on a single sheet. And that's what you're seeing here. Now, the interesting part about this is the first level. Each level, this is a 9-level deep dungeon. Each level has 4 rooms. But what happens is that this is, shall we say, meta-folded in truly odd ways. So you enter by walking into a corridor. So you see 60 feet down is as far as most characters can see, and it's so you walk down a 50-foot corridor, which is nothing. Then you start seeing doors every 40 feet. There's one on the left, then one on the right, then one on the left, then one on the right. Then there's a gap that's a little bit longer if you keep going down the hallway, and this section here is actually this section here. So it's meta folded dungeon. So you end up with between this door this door on this side and this door, which is the next door, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's 100 feet. So you end up with a bit of a gap. Because it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's a 20-foot gap because this overlays to this. But you also have, in here, we have some secret passages which cross levels. And it's like this one goes all the way to here, and this one goes under here and goes to this level. And you have... So it's a fairly well-connected dungeon. Like this goes down here and over here and up this way and into this room here. But it's a single level, it's a single sheet, multi-level dungeon. I've never had anybody explore all of this. I've had a few people come in, and it's interesting to watch them try and map it, because this is one where you cannot show the DM's map to the players because it's not understandable. And that's why I actually tried to color code this. You notice level 2 is green, level 3 is blue, and then you have yellow. So you can see how I tried to color code it in a odd way. And this is all done by hand. And if you're using a 5mm pencil when you draw this in a straight edge, your 5mm lines fit nicely into here. I actually have that's a 0.5mm. I actually have a 0.3mm engineering pencil, which is very sharp and will draw very, very fine lines. If you see there's a little crease here, my scanner isn't quite large enough to scan this sheet, so I had to paste it together with GIMP, as you're seeing here. But it allows me to put everything on a single dungeon. And this creates a 36-room dungeon. There's 36 rooms in here because you've got 9 levels, each with 4. So there's 36 dungeon. And the idea was this here connected to up here. So it was literally circular. And only if you got up here and went this way did you get back out. So you could sort of get trapped in the dungeon if you went the wrong way. You couldn't. You could get back to where you were. It was all connected, and this was I was having fun and playing tricks with laying out a dungeon. And this is obviously what created this. Obviously, some truly perverse mad wizard created this because it is so hyperlinked. Because you can't draw this in a normal fashion. That's why this gets here. But I wanted to show this. This is an example of creating a dungeon. And I strongly recommend you take a look at millimeter paper. You can find it online on Amazon, and it's available. Hunt for millimeter paper. And that will allow you to put a sheet of there on the dungeon. You can create, like, these rooms are not 20 by 20. They are 19 by 20. And if you wanted to, and I've done this on another map where you create your rooms are odd sizes, like 14 and 12, 12 width rooms. And if you get layout of your own home or your apartment, you don't find 20 by 20 rooms. 20 by 20 room is actually a fairly large room for most people, and you run into like 14 by 11, which I think is the size of my office, is like somewhere around there. But it's not even in feet. It's like 11 feet 4 inches or something, and you run it. But you can get close to this. You know, if you're using a straight edge and a 0.3 pencil, you can get relatively accurate with this, and your scale is almost the same scale as you're drawing if you're using 5 squares to the inch paper, because that gets 25 feet to the inch and this gets 24.5 feet to the inch. Just a slight difference, just a little bit. So the little bit large, each of the 1 millimeter squares are a little bit larger than 1 foot, compared to the other ones. They'd be but hard to. It gets lost in rounding, but it's an interesting approach to creating a dungeon using millimeter paper. And I wanted to create a highly connected dungeon, which this is, because there's lots of secret passages, and there are lots of ways to get through here. In essence, you enter the dungeon and you just keep running, and you can keep running straight down the hallway and 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 straight down the hallway, straight down the hallway. And if you turn around and run the other way, you get out. But if you keep going, it just keeps going and going and going and going. And it allows you to create something that can be very confusing to players, but with most players taking their time exploring individual rooms. Now let's talk about how do you keep track of what's in a dungeon. And if you're going truly old school, you go by 3x5 cards. Now, I'm going to mention something. I mentioned this before, but some people didn't even think about this one. The 3x5 cards, if you get a hole punch and punch a hole in the corner, like I've done here, and then you get one of these little rings like this, and they come in different sizes. You can put your dungeon on something like this, and it allows you to flip open and you can see what's in there. Now, this dungeon I'm not sure that this is actually the deck of cards for that dungeon. I have a bunch of decks of cards like this. Some of them are I've converted to electronic form. This deck of cards you can't see, but this is when I did this many years ago. I actually had fanfold, what's called fanfold 3x5 cards, which fit through a dot matrix printer, if you're familiar with that really old school printer. And we printed it all up and broke up the cards and put the holes in them and put them into the decks like this. So this is that was when I actually got to the point where I was using some form of electronics for this. Today, my printer will print 3x5 cards. I know that. See if your printer will print something as small as that. You may have some border issues, but what happens is that most of the printers now that handle photographic paper, you want to be able to print smaller format print things like that, and they're color, which means you could create a whole bunch of things. And if you just use the 3-hole punch, and you can populate it, and now you've got your dungeon on a deck of cards like this, and you can keep notes on it with a pencil, and you've got your map, which is a single sheet, and you can go to town and you can create your dungeon. It doesn't require more than pencil and paper, and I've seen people draw up these elaborate dungeons, but it's like this dungeon, if I was going to, even if I had that artistic bent, and I don't, I would have a difficult time letting any player see that. So the only person who would ever see that would be me, or if I'm doing it on a video, and then I would never play that dungeon for several years before other players. Then they might find it anyway and figure out what all I put into the dungeon. It's like when I'm going through the Hellwell, which is a series that I've done, I don't intend on playing Hellwell for many years, unless for many years from now, because it has some odd things about it, in particular the size and scale of each of the rooms, and the fact that people today don't like to play large number of characters. So that's a different topic, but dungeons don't have to be this complicated thing. You don't need to draw them up all pretty, because if you're the dungeon master creating the dungeon, you don't need, anybody else needs to see your dungeon. And it's only you, unless you want to share it. Now, I use Campaign Cartographer, and I've used that for many years. When I first started doing it would be about 1998. So I'm going on 20 years I'm 18 years right now, or 19 years of using Campaign Cartographer for drawing up my dungeons. But I still have some older dungeons that I have around that I haven't converted, even after 20 years. Because I created up a large number of dungeons, and the advantage with this is you could go someplace that you can throw in, if you had your books, that's the heaviest part, and a deck of cards like this for a small dungeon, and a single sheet for the map, you're ready to go. And you need some dice, and you don't need miniatures. I've used miniatures. And after investing several $100s in miniatures, I'll say, and painting them and spending a lot of time doing that, and I enjoyed that, but I had a very different job. And there was a time of my life when I actually could at work on the miniatures. So, because I would be waiting for the computer to compile and various things like that. So I could read or do whatever, and I had a lot more time to spend. Now computers are so much faster, and I can do other things and be productive. So miniatures, I just don't have the time anymore to deal with all the challenges, though I do have a few painted up and so on. But if you want to get into that, that's fine. But the advantage to using the theater of the mind is that you don't need to draw a pretty dungeon. And I've seen people draw pretty dungeons, and I go, Okay, that's great. And I like to I like what Campaign Cartographer kicks out, because I can create something quickly, and I would probably spend less time doing it that way than I would doing it all by hand, and looks a lot better because I'm not that good with my hands in drawing. I'm not an artist. And I don't want anyone to think that you have to be an artist to draw up these beautiful, intricate dungeons, whereas you can just use a sheet of paper and leave it to the players. And like this dungeon that I described is not mappable, at least not from the player's point of view, because things connect in weird ways. And it makes it very difficult for they can draw where they've been, but until they get back and go, this connects to here, did we make a mistake in drawing? And that's where the dungeon master has to play a poker face, where you don't give them any hint about how things are actually there. So your dungeons don't have to be restricted to reality. You can connect them in truly strange and wondrous ways. And I highly suggest you don't create a dungeon that's difficult to get out of, particularly a hyperlinked dungeon where you only have to go one way. And I've talked about connectivity of the dungeons. I like to have the dungeons highly connected, so there's many ways in and many ways out. Or even if there's only one way in and one way out, it's not that hard to get to. Like the one that I just showed, there's the main hallway. And depends upon which way you run, whether you get out or not. So that boils down to a binary choice. So it's interesting to see how different dungeons work. I'd like to hear your comments. What do you think of this kind of old school drawing and this kind of old school writing up of your dungeon? And like I said, if you today you can use Word or whatever and write up your dungeon and put it on and have it printed out on nice 3x5 cards, and it'll look nice. And you may want to make the font a little smaller because you're printing on a fairly small card. And I highly recommend, if you're using the 3x5 cards, that you put the hole in the corner and put a loop through it, so that first off, if you drop it, it doesn't get out of order, and it keeps it all together for a long period of time. Like I said, this has been that way probably 20 years. So those are just little hints on how to do truly old school dungeons. Thank you for watching my video. I look forward to learning what you think about this video. Let me know in the comments below. I appreciate all your comments. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. If you don't like the video, give me a thumbs down. I appreciate both forms of feedback. If you're new here and would like to subscribe, you can click on the icon on the left. If you're interested, there's more content on the right.